friends, this is Danielle from sibylslab of Cartomantics, coming to you with a topical color related video. I decided it's a season when I'm seeing a lot of black and white decks, and I have a fair number of black and white decks, and yet I have said more than once to my friends, if not on the channel, that I like to avoid black and white decks for a few different reasons. First, I feel like I'm getting old, and I have sometimes trouble seeing the details and nuances of artwork if I don't have the support of a lot of color contrast. So sometimes I just find it difficult to see the artwork on the card. And as a reader, artwork is really, really important to me. I'm not a person who's going to say, like, I read the Three of Swords this way. I read the Three of Swords in the way that a particular piece of art speaks to me, in addition to the stuff I bring to a card. So the nuances of that particular piece of art are really important. And so I tend to avoid black and white art that makes that more difficult. Also, I think that the unique color medicine of varied palettes are really informative for my own experience of art, whether in tarot or just as a viewer in general. The art I have in my house is a range of palettes. So we have the pastels over here. We have like rich, oranges and ombres and different pieces of art I have in my house. We have burgundies and some, Russian expressionism somewhere in my house. So I really like rich colors and the evocative nature of them. Aside from just being easier to see and more legible for me, I find them more emotionally engaging. And so black and white artwork just doesn't have the benefit of that. And so I tend to avoid it for that reason. However, if I acknowledge that there is a special medicine associated with palettes and colors and whatever, that means if I'm avoiding black and white artwork, then I'm missing that medicine. And I need to do some investigation of the unique power and medicine connected to what we find in the spareness of the black and white contrast, or, ombre and, or not ombre, like beige and black or whatever. You get what I'm saying. So I thought I would bring out a few pairs of tarot and oracle decks that are black and white. So black and white tarot deck, black and white oracle deck that I think pair together nicely, and what I find valuable in that pair, what gift and medicine I think that particular pair offers specifically. And as a part of putting this together, I have the benefit of kind of rediscovering the black and white decks in my own collection and feeling inspired to maybe not just lay out for you what I see as the potential for these pairs, but actually go off and do the work and see what I can get from them. I will start with two honorable mentions. So I did a video called 8 Decks for Dark Rooms. And these two decks were in that video, so I'm not going to show them here aside from just naming them, but they're decks that I do use more than these other ones, and that I see more obvious, like I've experienced the medicine of these decks more obviously in the past, so I need less convincing to use them. But there's the Nigredo Tarot, an indie deck that was, last I checked, in print. It is quite grotesque and very confronting, so only work with this deck if that's something that you are interested in doing. It is named for the shadowiest part of the alchemical process, and it is a deck that is stated to have been created for shadow work. Then there is the Purgatorium Oracle by Mr. Freiborg. This is unfortunately out of print, but it is a deck that I use. It is based on art thematized around the burning of European witches and witch hunting. It too has confronting art. We see themes here, right? So black and white art being connected to real darkness, real confrontation, real exposure and evisceration. Feels a little slicing you open. So I wonder if we'll see that theme continued through the other pairings that I chose. But those are two black and white decks that I do use and I think are great and worth mentioning outside of those I'm going to show here. So the first deck pairing, I will name it and describe what I think is great about this pairing, how I think it can be used, and then I'll talk about it as we go. The first pairing is the Of Light and Dust Tarot. This is by Afruza Migi. It's a very little known deck for some reason. Gorgeous. So we'll look at it. But I'm pairing this with the Poesis Oracle, which is, I know, a deck folks are more and more familiar with. I got this years ago, backed it on Kickstarter, and I'm glad to see it kind of having a resurgence, its moment. But here is how I would say that I find these decks valuable. So I think that they really evoke a kind of spiritual silence and quietness. Again, this is Of Light and Dust. That they show a kind of spiritual curiosity without being relentless. So we found evisceration and confrontation in Nigredo Tarot and in Purgatorium. Not so here. Here, the black and white, the sort of charcoal art is reflective. It's silent. It's dramatic. It's subtly beautiful. So much black and white art can be mournful or moody. This, it has its mood, but I don't feel a moodiness here. I feel a presence. There are not a lot of faces, right? We see the palette, the black and white, having a personality and holding space more than we would typically see, because we don't have this sort of emotional nuance of the face to rely upon. We have the shadows and the light, as the title tells us. Can I tell you guys? So one of my favorite things, I learned about this deck, first of all, because I had a scholar's residency at a retreat center in the Appalachian Mountains. Or not the Appalachian Mountains, in upstate New York. What am I talking about? But I was there with some other scholars and some artists and poets, and was doing my nerdy tarot thing and reading for a bunch of people who thought I was like cuckoo for doing this, and yet all wanted readings, of course. And one of the men there told me that he was friends with a woman named Afruza Migi, who is an artist in New York and was drawing her own tarot deck, and it was special, and I should totally order it when it was on the market. That's how I heard about it. I haven't seen it posted anywhere else or talked about anywhere else. It is, last I checked, still in print, and is, as you see, something really meditative and we see a lot of hijabi women. We see a lot of symbolism connected to the East and Middle East. A lot of stars and feathers. Some angels. A lot of hands and limbs. But I have to tell you, when I got the deck, so I ordered it to be supportive, and because I saw a few pictures online and thought, cool, like I like to own tarot decks that I haven't really heard about elsewhere, because I want to support indie creators and I want to learn about decks that are like treasures that are lesser known. But here's the back of the box that I just loved, you guys. Internationally recognized and award-winning artist Afrooza Migi explores the love affair between light and shadow, night and day, the visible and the unseen. Illustrated over the course of 1 year, each card is a story within itself, a reflection of personal experience and research. This deck presents us with a world in which opposites unify and the stars meet the earth. Light becomes inseparable from dust. This is the line. This is a daily use deck that is equally functional and beautiful. I don't know what it is that made me go bananas for that, but so many decks, especially black and white decks, are made to be serious and are made for shadow work and are made for moody work and seriousness. There is something about this artist making something so meditative and gorgeous and saying it is a daily use deck. Like, this is a deck that was intended for a person who might only have one tarot deck. This is a deck that is meant for the daily readings that are like, I kind of want to, I'm going crazy as a parent. My kids are driving me nuts. What do I do? Or, what's really going on with my car and the noises it's making? Or what am I really afraid of? Whatever, all the stuff. Like the range of myth and legend and mundane, that this is a daily use deck. That made me love it even more. And even though it's not one that I've used much at all, not nearly enough, I just love the artist and her intention with this deck, that stated intention. What an interesting Four of Wands, right? The little tiny guidebook, little white book, I really love her choice. This is what it looks like, majors and minors, and every card has one sentence of a very poetic nature that says something meaningful about the energy and intention associated with that card. So this Eight of Swords, let's look this up. One complaint about this is it's not in any order. Like the majors are in the back. It kind of drives me nuts. All right. The cages that bear our imprints are the hardest to flee. The cages that bear our imprints are the hardest to flee. That is unusual, interesting. It is a deck, and yet this is a daily use deck. I love it, you guys. All right, so let's look at the Poesis Oracle. So having said that about this deck, that I find it quiet, meditative, gentle in a way, and yet unafraid of the shadow alongside the light, I think that the Poesis Oracle, as you see, encompasses with absolute simplicity and spareness of color the range of emotion. So disillusion, magic. We see these really big, important feelings, ideas represented by very simple symbols. It's a rich symbolic language. Breathe. Like, look at that. So, and I really like this wound. The spareness and sort of authentic impactfulness of this very simple black and white art, I think, creates a lot of pathways for our daily use deck of light and dust. As I get to know both of these decks better, I've used this more than I've used of light and dust. Silence, I love this card. A good way that I've found to do work like this is to choose an oracle card in a deck that I'm trying to get to know, and asking its meaning and using the tarot deck to answer. So, pulling blockage. What is blockage? Having that card, setting it aside, and pulling 3 tarot cards to answer that question. What is blockage? What is the meaning of escape as we find it in this art? What is sovereignty? What a powerful word. So not just what is the meaning of the word sovereignty, which is a really powerful concept, a really impactful thing to think about as we think about our own agency, our surrender of agency, our absconding of sovereignty when we don't want to take responsibility for what's going on in our lives. But not just the meaning of sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean as it's depicted in that image? You know, let's pull 3 cards from Of Light and Dust to explore what is child as we are to understand its meaning, with a child crawling out of shells or leaves, and this particular, the predominance of black in this image, the inclusion of flowers, but not much else. Explore. We have the tongue and the lips in the sky. We have a very small figure and a long path on a very large kind of scaled landscape. The body with its different energy centers. I love the simple images of cards like growth. So that's how I think I need to start my work with these cards. I want to see them speak to each other, because I really think that the sentimentality, and I don't mean that in the kind of dismissive way, like, oh, it's sentimental. No, but I think that they hold a lot of sentiment and a lot of gentleness. They both hold space, but are not comfort decks as I would describe something like the Nigredo Tarot, which I find to be very comfortable and holding, not comfortable, comforting. But these are gentle in their inquiry, but direct in their gaze. Like womb. That is not an easy concept. It's not a soft concept, but it is very spare imagery, and I would be curious to know what 3 cards from Of Light and Dust has to say about womb or about trust. So that's my first pairing, Of Light and Dust and Poesis Oracle. All right. The next pairing, notes. El-Goliath Tarot, 3rd edition. So it looks like kind of like a pocket size, especially compared to the big cards of the other editions. So El-Goliath Tarot paired with the Bloodlands Oracle. As you will see, or if you know these decks, El-Goliath is an indie deck. Bloodlands is a mass market deck. They are both still in print, last I checked. They both show a really kind of profound brutality and rawness of the external world, of the natural world, but tinged with magic, especially El-Goliath. You'll see it's shamanic. There's a kind of like animals eating each other, and fear and anxiety and roughness, but also some anthropomorphizing of like the spirituality of animals that we find. And the Bloodlands Oracle provides rich setting for the dramas that we see laid out in El-Goliath. So I'll talk a little bit more about them as I share them. Here is the El-Goliath. I have the 2nd edition, and here's the back of the cards. But the cards were so big, I found them difficult to shuffle. And I'm much happier with this size of card. And I think that even though I'm sensitive to the details of black and white images and can find them difficult to see on a regular size card, let alone on a smaller card, I find the way in which Goliath includes detail here to not lose anything by its size. So even though it's smaller sized And even though the art is quite detailed, I don't feel like I'm missing anything by its size. And I don't feel the anxiety I can sometimes feel at black and white art. Doesn't, the degree of detail is just right. And the way that his medium, I think, shows contrast well for those of us with imperfect and older eyes. I like that the cards have titles aside from just their official or usual titles. So the Emperor is the ruling father. On these small cards, the title, like the additional title, the ruling father, is really inconspicuous. I know that they're there from my work with the larger deck or my familiarity with the larger deck, but I actually really like how unobtrusive the small titles are given the size of these cards. I know they're there. The meteor shower for the Eight of Wands. It adds something nice if I want to look, but it's so small that I can easily ignore the title if I don't want to look. So, this is a good example of the sort of shamanic, interesting, anthropomorphic magic of the deck. But there isn't, a real lack of sentimentality. And a really confrontational, this is a confronting image, a really confrontational gaze to these animals, this Three of Swords, the bleeding raw heart. Like, come on, guys. Just that title, the bleeding raw heart. This Four of Cups. Like, there is an unforgiving quality to this nature, to this natural world. And Goliath has very clearly stated that this is a deck meant for shadow work. So it makes sense that he's going to show images and approach the archetypes in a way that is meant to force a confrontation with the shadow and force our encounter with nature in a way that's uncomfortable and unsettling and defamiliarizing. There's no way to look at these images, at least for me, and to, like, this Three of Pentacles. This is so unsettling and imposing. Look at that. And this Eight of Swords. Like, there's no avoiding the uncomfortable. And I respect that he has an intention with this art, and his deck is doing that work. He says that it's meant for shadow shamanic work, and it does exactly what it promises to do. So let's see how Bloodlands Oracle serves this. I've said elsewhere on the channel and stick by really liking, I like metaphor, and I really like the metaphor of place as a site where work happens, where the work, exploratory, divinatory, journaling, self-investigatory work happens. So here's the back of the cards. And here's the size comparison. Here. So much smaller, right? If you have these next to each other, the Oracle deck is going to be taking up a lot of space. The Bloodlands Oracle, like any Oracle of place, at least the way I use it, I use as the actual physical imaginative foundation and site of the work I'm doing. So if I'm saying that this pairing of decks is great for a kind of exploration of a raw, unforgiving, brutal natural world, it's really, the cards as I see them are about what we find in the uncivilized world when we lift off the sheen of performance, of makeup and clothes and pretense. What really happens? Animals eat each other, raw hearts bleed, environments are threatening or daunting. And that's difficult work. I think El-Goliath forces that work. It's up to us whether we pick up the deck, but if we do, that's the work it's going to insist that we do. And this deck provides the four corners of that investigation. So if I'm saying I need to do a reading today about what latent fear is animating my hostility to someone. So let's say I'm really being an unkind person, an unkind lady to someone at work, but I can't quite pin down like what is the source of my angst, and I'm not being mean to anybody else. So it's like something is going on that is coming up for me in relationship to this one person. This has never happened, of course. Never to happen. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I am inclined to pull 3 cards from El-Goliath, probably between 1 and 3. I mean, I think those cards are powerful enough that one can do the job, but I think magic happens between 2 and 3 cards. So if I'm going to pull 3 cards, I find it helpful to first set the tone for that reading by asking my question, what is going on up here? Like, what stuff am I bringing to my dynamic with this person? What shadows under there that I haven't grappled with? And I'm going to pull a card from Bloodlands to figure out what room I'm in, what setting I'm in, and I pull the falls. So I know that my encounter with this person isn't just bringing up some moodiness, some like, I have a thing with people with this personality and I'm mapping it onto this person who reminds me of it. This is bringing up feelings that are absolutely uncontrolled, like rushing feelings that are just pouring over me. You know when like you are in a high intensity situation or you feel like your body is flush in adrenaline or like it's bringing up, you are infected, you went from a reasonable person to a person overwhelmed by some sort of like memory or something. That's the room I'm in. That's the setting I'm in. And now I'm going to pull those 3 cards from El-Goliath. And I have a sense of context for that reading that I wouldn't have had if I just pulled 3 cards. Let's say that I want to know, I have something I want to submit somewhere. I'm thinking about getting something published, but I'm like, I can't get up the nerve to submit it, and I don't know why. Like, what's the worst that can happen? They can say no, but what's, like, this is more than just a little resistance and a little bit of fear of rejection. What is the environment that this feeling is happening in before I pull my cards from El-Goliath? The lightning strike. So what is that bringing up? I'm afraid that actual moment of rejection, like that absolute hit, I'm not going to be resilient after that. It's not I'm afraid of rejection. It's that there's something that's like, it will be deeply destabilizing, that moment of rejection. So that's the environment that this is happening in. My kind of prevailing anxiety about my resilience or not in a moment of rejection. And now let's pull 3 cards that kind of do a deeper investigation into what's going on. So that gives you a sense of how I see these decks working together. Let's see if they actually work like that. And I actually kind of get them shuffled and do some journaling and do some work. But that's how I see that work going. So let's see. The third pairing, or actually, the third pairing I was going to say is Nigredo and Purgatorium, but I already shared those. I'm going to share a final deck that is a tarot deck and an oracle deck-ish. all by itself. But I think this deck was made in a period of grief by the artist. This is made by the artist Dan Francis. This is the Hyde Tarot. This is in print the last time I checked. It is an English deck, and a deck from the UK. So if you order it right now and you're in the States, it may be difficult moment to get from overseas. But if you can grab a copy, it's gilded. Here's the back. He made it during a period, if I'm recalling, of grieving his father. As you can see, and I've talked about this deck before, it has the standard Rider-Waite-Smith structure, not Rider-Waite-Smith, tarot structure, right? So it has 22 majors, it has 16 court cards, 4 suits, but every card has a symbol and title that is distinct from that tarot title, and you can use this deck as a plain oracle or even as a fortune-telling deck given its choice of symbols. So, you know, a good old-fashioned fortune-telling deck like Lenormand will come with like ring and brush and glove, and you do something with those. Those tend to be the fortune-telling decks I like, and I tend to use fortune-telling decks like that. Or decks like that rather, so decks with cards like that, you know, ring or dove or you know, knife. I use them more like fortune-telling decks than I do like, you know, more traditional oracle decks like Bloodlands Oracle or something. For that reason, when I conceive of using of this deck like an oracle deck, paying less attention to its tarot associations, that is how I think of using it. However, I love balancing the idea of this as a deeply grounded tarot deck and its approach with fortune-telling distilled symbols. For example, this is the Death card. Death, the symbol here is statue. Now, we could just read this card as statue, paying no attention to death as the card that it represents in tarot. Statue is still. Statue is a monument. It is a symbol of memory or prominence. It is often a memorial of honor for whatever the statued, the represented figure or moment is. Now, if I ignore the title statue and just pay attention to the title death and look at the image, this is a figure frozen in movement and made immobile, made concrete. This isn't a hanged man who's stuck for a moment. This is life made still, life frozen and no longer mobile. I think that this is powerful as a death card, no title, a statue. But with both of those in mind, the statue and death and this image, I love the magic of the three of them. So that's what I mean when I say really like appreciating this deck very much in its kind of liminal tarorical orientation. Now, why is it relevant that this was made during Dan Francis' period of grief? I think that his selection of symbols, fossil for King of Pentacles, tiger for Page of Pentacles, they are really novel in some ways. We would not expect to see a tiger as a Page of Pentacles, maybe as a Knight of Wands, right? Tigers and wildcats we think of as fire cards. That's typically where we see them represented if they're anywhere in the tarot. But I find the choices that he made um, about what symbols go where, very much connected to his autobiographical association and personal symbolic language. I don't feel very much like the creator sat and thought, what is a really great symbol for for readers in general to access when thinking of Page of Pentacles. I think what happened um, is he thought, what touches my story and my life, like my association with symbols that started in childhood and represents Two of Wands as I understand it. And that makes me think of Cocoon. We start our symbolic language when we're children. Like our notion of disguise for Knight of Pentacles, weird, interesting, unusual. The owl for Queen of Cups, we typically see the owl as a Queen of Swords. But there's a lot of symbolism connected to childhood, symbolic language and associations, to frozenness, being stuck in time, to parts of the body like tooth or face or a body frozen statue or death, the mask for Six of Pentacles. There's just so much connected to a kind of suspended moment. A person who created a collection of images connected to his autobiographical experience and his reflections in a moment of suspension, an emotional and symbolic suspension. I actually say that with all like excitement and embrace. I love the story of this deck. I usually say, as most of us do, any tarot deck can do anything. I think this would be terrible if it was your only tarot deck. I do not think, and you were reading it for tarot. If you were like, I want a deck that is phenomenal and interesting and does all kinds of stuff, this would be great, right? It can be used as a fortune telling deck. It can be used as a tarot deck, whatever. And if the structure and architecture of tarot are not important to you, then like it's a matter of indifference that it's also the Bell and Temperance. And also the Starfish as Two of Pentacles. Like, interesting, weird. But if you want to learn tarot and you're deeply committed to the power of that architecture, I think this would be like a terrible idea if it was your only tarot deck. That said, I don't think that Dan Francis had any interest in making a tarot deck that like does the work of tarot, period, full stop. I think he was creating a self-narrative object that was magically connected to that architecture and created an interesting nexus and matrix with these vestiges of thoughts and memories and symbols that live for him and that were coming up for him during a period of deep self-reflection and mourning. I have used this deck a fair amount, even though it's black and white, but I think it's, I said like, it's weird, I'm only showing a tarot deck, or this is tarot and oracle. This is like, the other ones I showed pairings. This deck is itself the pairing. How's that? Queen of Pentacles, the fruit, which is the pomegranate. I love this. Like, this deck forces me to understand the archetypes of tarot that I understand and feel pretty confident with in general, to sit with them differently. Like, for example, the High Priestess as the dog. Like, I need to sit with this because it's not just the dog, it's this dog, right? So, like, journal, please. What does it mean to think of, like, the High Priestess as an archetype that we understand, like, who started as the Pepes in medieval card playing and has evolved into like this kind of liminal ghost dog, canine, companion, silent, powerful magic. Like, what's happening? And dogs are a formative archetype for me. My first word in the world was dog. I've always had dogs in my life, literally always. Um, I love the idea of thinking about how the dog as a symbol connects to the high priestess as a powerful, you know, card number 2 of the tarot. I love this Knight of Swords, the monster. Man, that's wild. It's so wild. Um, or Eight of Cups, the sheep. I actually find this really kind of creepy and daunting. That's what I mean, like parts of bodies, and Six of Cups, the relic. Perfect. But anyway, I find this deck, the Hierophant as the skull, find this deck really good for grief work and really good for silent reflective work. I was talking about Of Light and Dust as a great pause for silence, but I actually think that's different, right? I think of Light and Dust and Poesis as quiet. So they're doing work and giving answers, but they're doing it subtly. They're not loud and ostentatious, but they are talking. They're just not chatting loudly. This, not so much. I think like the dog, high priestess, or the bull, the moon, they want to come out by themselves and sit. They want to talk to me. They want us to sit together for a bit. So a good fortune telling deck can be 6 cards on a table that amount to one oracular sentence. And I think this deck does that. It really can. I've done that with this deck because I wanted to kind of see, like, what if we put the eye next to the mouse, next to the glove, and read that like it's a Lenormand spread. Absolutely works. But if I need something for grief or mourning or a quiet pain, and not holding me, right? Not comforting, but just seeing that, I think it's fantastic. This Nine of Swords is the painting. Fascinating. All right, friends, that is my ode, my video length ode and reflection on black and white decks. I need to do my work with these decks, and this, like I said, is an excuse to have pulled them out and thought meaningfully about the work that they're great for. I hope that this was interesting to you, and I'd love to see in comments what black and white decks you have and the place of black and white decks specifically, or color in general, in your practice, the way that you integrate color medicine into your work. You know, I talked about color medicine. I don't have some sophisticated theory of color medicine. I wish I did. But I do know that, like, colors make me feel things, and the absence of color also makes me feel something, but I kind of avoid that feeling, that absence, which probably itself says something. All right, we like to end a video on this channel with a reading for the collective. In today's reading for the collective, I'm going to use Hyde Tarot, is answering the question. Let's just go direct. What does a black and white color palette, a plain, simple color palette, have to teach us this week? So what decks can you pick up, or what pieces of art or movies can you watch in black and white? Like, what is lifting the loudness of color, the space that color takes up in your visual life, lifting that out and engaging with the muted? What does that have to offer us this week? First card is the Orchid, the Emperor. Second card is the Amber, Four of Wands. And remember, the guidebook comes as a PDF and is really succinct but very clear about why he made the choices he made. From what I remember, the Emperor as the Orchid You know, orchids are very difficult to grow. They're controlled, they're beautiful, highly structured, very, um, you can't be creative when you're growing or taking care of an orchid. It rules its tending. It is precise in the environment it requires to flourish. And so there's something there about rule and order and environmental control. And amber is the suspension and consolidation of rule and order. It's being forced into stillness. It's taking what's around you and freezing it permanently. This isn't just a statue, a monument. This is a moment that is timeless and still. And like, this flying creature did not die naturally. This was moving and then not moving, right? This is not posed like a statue. Order against all wishes and motion and reason. I think that this seems to suggest that you, like me, find freedom in the noise and movement of color. This calls for an ordered silence and stillness. If you, like me, appreciate the synergy of vibrance, there seems to be this suggestion here that we would be served by no synergy and by embracing silence and stillness and sitting and letting the feelings or stuff that comes up rule the moment. You know, I don't know about you. If a big thing comes up in a reading, I am sometimes inclined, often inclined, to be like, I want to learn more about this. Let's pull some more cards. And that's an interesting reflection. Let's pull some more to clarify. And this seems to say, sit still, I'm in charge, and the absence of color requires the kind of clear lines of that, the quietness of that, the room dimmed, the, the distractions set aside. So an undistracted reflection and structure. I hope that was interesting to you. That was interesting to me, instructive, and that you were served by this inquiry. This has been great fun, guys. If you too would like to investigate your own black and white decks or the place of color medicine in your practice, I'd love to mentor someone through that. That would be fascinating. And a journey for me too. But I hope that you guys have a great week in your experience with color, whatever it is. And until next time, guys, I will see you in the lab. Bye.